Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to all of you here. Welcome to the Deloitte Green Room at Davos. We are live streaming this, so to everybody online, welcome and good morning to you as well. This morning event is going to look at a report that the charity Education Employers has just published called Drawing the Future, which through drawings shows the aspirations of primary school aged children. It's a survey of 20,000 children around the world, drawn from 20 countries, about what they want to do in their careers, and it talks about the issue of gender stereotyping, and that's what we're going to examine today. My name's David Cruickshank. I'm chairman of Deloitte globally, but I also chair the board of trustees of the Education Employers charity, which is why we're all here today. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to those watching on live stream. I'm joined on the panel here by Nick Chambers, who is the director of the charity and whose team have done all the work that's produced this publication. And also Joanne Lipman, who is a journalist and most recently editor-in-chief of USA Today, and has recently written a book called That's What She Said, and has had a long career in journalism, so we'll give all of her perspectives. And also Katarina Wallin Bureau from Burson Marsteller, which is part of WPP Group, who is the COO for Burson Marsteller in Europe, and will also be giving her perspectives from a European angle. We are going to take questions today, so there are bits of paper around, or you'll be given bits of paper. If you'd like to scribble out questions, we'll deal with those at the end, but we have got some questions for the panel just to get things going. But first of all, I'm going to pass over to Nick Chambers, just to talk a little bit about the report and its main findings, how the evidence was produced, and how we've been interpreting it. So, Nick,
thank you very much. My name is Nick Chambers, and I want to talk about the report today. For those of you live streaming, there is a link onto the report called Drawing the Future. This report really has a lot to say on gender equality. We think one of the key reasons that we're making so little progress on gender equality is that stereotypes on jobs are ingrained at a very young age, and this is what this report is about. We think that if we tackle some of those ingrained stereotypes, we can actually begin to make progress. And as we've seen from recent reports from the World Economic Forum, we've stagnated. We're not going forwards. And we think there's a simple solution to help in that, and that is around stereotyping. We recently did a little film in the school, and we filmed 66 children in a primary school, and we got them to draw the job they wanted to do. So they were in one classroom in one school, and we asked them to draw a fighter pilot, a surgeon, I forgot what the other one now. I've seen this so many times. Someone will remind me in the audience. Firefighter. I've seen this so many times, this video. And of the children, they drew 61 of the drew men doing those jobs, and only 5 drew girls. So we called it Redrawing the Balance. It's had 35 million views around the world, and it showed very, very clearly that gender stereotypes at a young age. So what we then did, was we thought we'd better do this on a much bigger scale on one school. So we've done this survey of 20,000 children around the world. We've had 20 countries take part, and the findings are very, very stark. Firstly, we can show that gender stereotyping starts at a young age, and not just in the UK, it's a global issue. In every country we saw stereotyping starting from as young as 7 and younger. We also saw that many of the career aspirations of 7-year-olds aren't really changed that much to 18. So there's very little change between what a 7-year-old is choosing and what an 18-year-old is going on to do. So, unless we start really young, that's not going to significantly change things. We also saw a significant mismatch in the jobs that young people want to do and the jobs we need around the world in the economy. Particularly in the science and maths and out there on engineering, girls are just not looking at those things, and it's starting young and it's being ingrained. So how did we do it? Well, we did the survey, we did the drawings, and we asked for lots of information. So we asked for our ethnicity, we asked gender, obviously, we asked age, but we also, very importantly, asked did they know anyone who did this job? And if not, how did they hear about the job? So it's the first time we begin to look at those connections. Have they heard it from the TV or the media or from the family? And as I say, the fascinating, in the UK, top job for boys was sportsman by some significant way, and that's pretty common around the world. And for girls, it was teacher. And we think part of that is actually a lot of primary school teachers are female, and it's what they see all the time. So not surprisingly, that's what they draw. So bottom, actually, interestingly enough, celebrity came right at the bottom. High up, though, were things like, for boys, social media and gaming, police. For girls, it was teacher, vet, artist. So it's very evident. And sample size in the UK was 13,000. So it's across the piece. The next thing, ethnicity played another sort of major part as well. And again, if you go onto the report, you can see how we've broken that down by ethnicity. So very interesting. Where did kids hear about the jobs? Well, obviously a lot of people could from their parents. That's fairly obvious. Large numbers from the sort of TV, but actually very few from people doing those jobs. Only less than 1% had actually met people doing those different jobs. So their aspirations, their insights, are coming from the parents, which may be great, but actually quite limited, or what they see on TV. So how are they going to know about the world unless they meet people? So we did this sort of looking at this. We matched what kids wanted to do, where the jobs were. We saw nothing in common, and we called it nothing in common, between the career aspirations of young people and where the jobs in the market were. Sorry, someone's just standing there. Internationally, as I say, we had over 20 countries taking part. The only country where the boys and girls chose the same job, the only country, and I don't think this will surprise many people, is Iceland, because that's what the World Economic Forum rates as their number one for gender equality. Now, there must be some link in there. But going around the world, if you looked at Bangladesh, girls, 36% wanted to be doctors, followed by 20% wanted to be teachers, whereas the boys wanted to be in sport. China, top jobs there for girls, teacher and artist. Boys very heavily on the scientist. Uganda, very, very stark, again, by who you see. They see teachers, they see nurses, and they see drivers occasionally coming in. So in Uganda, I think 58% wanted to be a teacher, because that is what they see, and that's what they aspire to. But certainly in the developing countries, we're seeing very, very significant impact of social media on this and what people actually aspire to. Favourite subject, we also looked at that. Around the world generally, maths and English come top. Somewhat surprising, we thought, for China, art came top actually in China, which perhaps was somewhat unexpected. And again, the whole how do you hear about it, again, a global sort of issues where we are. Around the slides. So what do we do about it? Well, Andreas Schleicher, who many of you may have heard of, is the director of the OECD Education and Skills, said this is a really important. We need to start in primary. We need to get role models into primary and talk to people. So we think we've got a very simple solution. What we've built is we've built an online matchmaking service. We've used technology to connect volunteers with schools. We use technology to revolutionise how we buy things, how we sell things, how we do business, how we share ideas. So why shouldn't we be using technology to revolutionise the way our children, our future, connect and understand the world of work? So that's what this report is about. And in terms of action, what we want people to do is we want people very simply, and it couldn't be simpler, is to go in to a school and talk to young people from primary age. In the UK, we've got about 40,000 people doing it. We've got 80% of secondary schools. We've got about 3,500 primary schools. It is growing because the teaching body are really driving it, and we want to keep pushing that out. But we don't think that any young person should be growing up without the chance to meet a range of volunteers, from apprentices to CEOs, from apps designers to zoologists, from all sorts of backgrounds. And that should be a right. And actually we can use technology to revolutionise and actually start to do something about it. And all we ask of our volunteers is an hour a year. So we think an hour a year we can actually begin to make a difference in. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one point I'd like to add to what Nick has said. There is a lot of research that shows that the tipping point for when school children are influenced by people coming into their schools is about 4 interventions. So if 4 or more people go into a school, children are much more likely to be well informed about subject choices, career aspirations, choices they're making in life. Conversely, if they receive no visits from anybody from the world of work, they're much more likely to become not unemployed or not go into further education. That's research that the charity has done, but the OECD has also done research and other bodies have as well. So it doesn't take that many interventions, really, to make a difference. Obviously, more than 4 is better. Some schools have hundreds during the lifetime of a pupil, but I think there is some evidence around that as well for those of you who want to look at the evidence base for what can happen. So I think we'll go straight into questions now, just with the panel. And Joanne, you've written a book just on this subject, on the gender pay gap. So are you surprised by the findings of the report that really the gender stereotypes kick in so early?
Actually, I'm sadly not surprised. So the book that I've just finished, it's called That's What She Said, and it's actually about closing the gender gap at work by bringing men into the conversation, because women talking to each other is half a conversation and at most can solve half of the problem. We really need men together, which is why I'm delighted to be on this panel with women and men, and in the audience as well. The research that I did for my book, I looked a lot at the biases that are sort of inherent in society. And what you find is both conscious and unconscious bias that starts at such a young age. And I was surprised. You hear about biases in the workplace and beyond. But what you don't realize is these things are starting so early. So, for example, the research shows that mothers of infants routinely overestimate the age at which their sons begin to crawl, whereas they underestimate how quickly their daughters begin to crawl. Google has run the numbers on its own searches, and it's found that when parents of 2-year-olds put in the question to Google, "Is my child a genius?" they are more than twice as likely to be asking about a boy as a girl at the age of 2. And then there's, as you get older, the children in this film and in your study that we just saw, at right around that age, this was for 6-year-olds. There was a test done with teachers and first graders, and the first graders were asked to do a math test, and the math tests were graded. And the first round, the math tests were graded with no names on the test. In that case, the girls outscored the boys. The second case, those same papers were graded with names on them. The boys outscored the girls. Now, you would think that math is math. But what happens is there are these unconscious biases that kick in where the teachers, who, by the way, were all women, whereas the teachers were sort of giving extra credit to the boys or giving them partial credit and really marking down the girls. And so, again, we see it, and it's exactly what you found in your study, which is that these things start at a very young age, and if we don't do intervention at the very start, then it's going to be too late by the time we get these children growing up into school and then into the workplace.
Thank you. Now, my next question is going to sound a bit like a blame game, but as Nick referenced earlier, school students at a young age are influenced by friends, by parents, and by media. Now, you're from the media. So to what degree is the media responsible?
So the media certainly bears some responsibility, and the media certainly, when you look at all of the facts and figures around the media, I mean, men have the overwhelming number of speaking parts and action and lead roles in any television or film, unlike in real life. Women are always in the supporting roles. Men actually have a perception that there are more women. Men have a perception that women speak more than they do. Actually, men speak more than women. And men also have a perception that if there is a crowd scene in a movie that's maybe 1/3 female, they have a perception that it's majority female. So the media, and then the media, unfortunately, is still really overwhelmingly run by men, and that's both the entertainment industry, but it's also my own industry, the news industry. I'm one of the very few women who's run a large news organization, a very large, I had 3,000 journalists at the USA Today Network. The head of the AP is female, but there's not too many women who have run large media organizations, news organizations, and as a result, it really does change sort of the way that you perceive the importance of stories. And one just very quick example of that is if you think about Bill Cosby. When Bill Cosby was accused of being a sexual predator who was essentially drugging and raping women, that was primarily covered on the entertainment pages. It was not until this past few months when Harvey Weinstein, and to the credit of the New York Times and the New Yorker, which both broke that story, it wasn't until they treated that as a serious news story that deserved front page treatment and deserved scrutiny as a serious subject matter, that it was then embraced by men and women and became serious news. So it really does, the media impacts it, but as you saw, clearly family, social media, all the other influences are also hugely important.
Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be something in that people want to ask questions on. Just one final one for you, Joanne. We talked about this earlier on. The importance of men getting involved to help sponsor women, some children actually, even as early as the ages of the survey actually. Just talk a little bit about that and how you see that.
Sure. Because, as I said, women do talk amongst ourselves about all the issues we face. And I think that the sexual harassment, eruption, fury over that that's come out in the last few months has actually... It's not because every woman has been sexually assaulted, but it is because every woman understands what it feels like to be underestimated, marginalized, not heard, interrupted. And again, those things start very, very early. Again, in school, we just saw school children. In school, teachers tend to call on boys more than they call on girls. And this is something that goes from a very young age all the way up through college. And in college, by the time you reach college age, these students, a girl has to have an A average to be seen as the equal of a boy with a B average. And so if we don't kind of bring men into this conversation, first of all with awareness, because awareness is the very first step and really actually can help you stop yourself before you're, interrupting someone. The awareness piece of it is so important. But again, women talk amongst ourselves all the time about these issues. But by not talking to men, the men are really not aware of so many of what these issues are. And so once they do become aware of them, they can actually take action to help us to finally, for real, solve and close that gender gap.
Well, thank you. And Katarina, welcome. A few questions for you. You lead a project in your company, an offering called Advantage Women, which looks at embedding gender equality in the workplace for organisations that you advise. Just give your perceptions of the report and how much of it rings true and how you see it.
So for me, the really key thing about this report is that it shows why it's so complicated to make progress on closing the gender gap. And that's not for lack of trying from many corporations over many years. So if you just look at where we stand, the issue is in the spotlight. Media covers it incessantly. At a rough count, I estimated at least 50 sessions at Davos talking about gender equality. So it's in the spotlight like it hasn't been for a long time. Secondly, if it was needed in addition to the moral case, the economic case has been made. I think from any esteemed organization, McKinsey estimated that you'd add 28 trillion to global GDP if women entered the workforce at the same rate as men and were paid the same. Yesterday, the esteemed Tina Fordham pointed out at an event that the much talked about tax reforms and fiscal stimulus by President Trump will add 1.5% to growth in the U.S. economy, whereas bringing more women, not all women, but women who want to enter the workforce in the U.S. would add 6%. So the economic case has been made. But we are still not making progress. no, we're now, I think there's 6% of female CEOs in the Fortune 500. There are still more men called Stephen in the FTSE 100, or male CEOs called Stephen in the FTSE 100 than there are female CEOs. And more than 60% of global firms have no women on their board, literally no women. And, you know, the World Economic Forum's own report last year sadly said that closing the gender gap has stalled and in fact is going backward. And by the way, they look at 4 indicators. They look at health, education, economic participation, and political empowerment. And it's not on health or education that which is driving the stalling gender gap. It is on economic participation. So we are educating women more and more around the world, and that gap is closing, but we're then not hiring them, retaining them, promoting them, etc. So for me, this report just really shows that this is such a complicated issue, and that is because it starts so early. And these stereotypes about what's a girl job, what's a boy job, and therefore, by definition, what is each respective role in society, starts so early. And by the time corporations come up with all these well-meaning intentions to change, it's kind of too late.
So just on that, picking up, and we were talking earlier about what companies do, and definitely this subject is more on the gender of leadership teams of companies than it's ever been before. To what degree do you see it being built into corporate purpose and really getting embedded down through organisations, or do you think that companies still struggle really to work out how to make the change?
Well, I think companies are struggling. I think it is about 2 things, about culture and purpose. So on the cultural side, I mean, as Joanne was saying, engaging men in this is so important. And we talked earlier about, a male CEO standing up and making this an issue is infinitely more impactful than, thousands of women networks. So it's really that leadership from the top that's needed. And on the purpose side, and I think we're here in Davos, there are very few companies, I think, here that would say they're not purpose-driven. Today, most companies say they pay some attention to people and planet in addition to profit. But I don't think you can claim to be a purpose-led company if you're not really doing something about gender diversity and gender balance. I think purpose to some extent came about because companies and organizations are trying to build trust with their own employees, with customers, with other stakeholders. And how can you really truly build trust if you're discriminating, if you're not paying your employees the same way, if you're not retaining and promoting your employees in the same way? So gender balance is, I think, integral to this whole wave, trend, positive development around companies having a strong corporate purpose.
And as you said, both of you said earlier, actually, there is such a strong economic underpinning to that argument, even before you get to what companies want to do and what purpose they should have. The economics speak for themselves, and but I think there is a broader purpose issue as well. Nick, just on to you now. I mean, Nick Chambers of Education Employers has been doing research in this area for about 15 years or so. Just talk a little bit about the report, Nick, and how it compares to previous work that the charity's done and what surprised you about it.
Yeah, you referred to earlier about the importance of meeting people. We've done a lot of work about the number of encounters that young people have with the world of work, and we worked out for teenagers that had a big impact on how likely they were to have a job and how much they had to be paid. Now, the reason we thought for that was if you met people who did the job, you had more understanding of that career, you were therefore making a better career choice, and you went into something that matched your interest and skills, and you earned more money as a result of it. So that was quite a sort of an obvious sort of result, but we looked at a lot of data around the world to sort of prove that was the case. But in primary, there's been very, very little research in primary at all, which is why we did this sort of major study, because people have focused on 14 and 15 and 16-year-old girls. There are endless and fantastic reports on, engineering. Why haven't we got more scientists, female scientists? There's fantastic research, but no one has really looked at primary. And to me, it seems fairly obvious, really, and that's where you start. And it's only when we did that thing with, 66 children in one room, and we thought, there is something happening here. And that's why we partnered with the OECD on this. We partnered with the head teachers, the main body in the UK, Association of Head Teachers, and the TES, the main magazine over there for teachers. And we partnered with them to really understand what was going on. And what we hope this study will do, and it's online, it's called Drawing the Future, will get people to start thinking about, well, we need to do something about this. We need to investigate these issues. So, yeah, we've done 20,000, we've done 20 countries, but we see this as just a start. But we want to put the spotlight on that if we really want to change, we need to start in primary. And this gives us some data. It's not the whole answer, but it's going to start a debate. And that's why it's so good to be here at Davos, because I want people to be looking at this and saying, there is something in this. You know, we can't just find in every country that we've got, in all these 20 countries, we see gender stereotyping. Now, there must be something in that. There must be something in that. And that kids, are hearing from their parents, which is absolutely fine, but then they're hearing from the media, but they're not hearing from the people who are doing these jobs. And if you can't see it, you can't believe it. And in primary, what we're saying, it's not really about careers, it's saying about showing kids what's possible in life and making it exciting and making subjects exciting. And we know in primary that if they can see why maths or English or art or drama or history, what they can lead to, they're more motivated to learn and not switch off. And what we find, particularly with girls, at 9 and 10, 11, they're beginning to close off options for no good reason at all, because they can't see the relevance. Now, if they meet people who do these jobs, and they think, oh, I never thought of that. And they think, oh, actually, with that maths, if I work hard at maths, I can do this career. Or if I work hard in languages, I can do this. But if you can't see it, how can you dream about it? So we're limiting our kids' horizons and their aspirations. A lot of kids have amazingly high aspirations, but they're very, very narrow. Sports people, sometimes a great aspiration, but it's very narrow. So what we've got to do is broaden the horizons and, raise the aspirations, particularly broaden them by showing them what is possible.
I think if you combine what Nick said then with the World Economic Forum, where we obviously are, but last year the World Economic Forum did some research, again globally, and I won't remember the numbers exactly, but they estimated that 62% of children today who are primary school children would go into jobs that don't today exist. 62% would go into jobs that today don't exist. So this need to dream about possibilities and to be prepared for all sorts of eventualities and a different world is so important. Nick, you talked earlier about the tools that charities develop to help businesses connect with schools, and that's there. And we obviously want lots more businesses to join and get people to go into schools to talk about their jobs. You work with the OECD on the report. The OECD represents governments. What do you think governments should do?
We think they should take this issue seriously. They should think what's going on in their primary schools. We've had a lot of governments working with us, but they should be going back and saying, what is going on in our primary schools? Do these stereotypes exist? And I'm sure they will, but what do they look like? And what they can do. In the UK, our government has been fantastic, because what they've been doing is encouraging people to go into schools. We made it really simple. We asked people to give an hour a year. Now, 6 years ago to the day, we got Bill Gates to give an hour a year to go to a school in London. Now, people like that can give up an hour a year. Anyone can. But, equally, we want people in their early 20s and early 30s, across the range, apprentices, young people who want to go in. So we've made it really simple for our government. They'll do a tweet out to civil servants. They did it to 400 civil servants saying, volunteer an hour a year. It's good for you. You'll enjoy it. You just go online, you click there. It's dead simple. Because it's been developed by Deloitte and Salesforce and Bank of America, very easy matchmaking service. You do go on, you click on there. So our government looking at lots of issues around diversity and so on. They want to get people out, so we work with lots of government departments because it's easy for them and it doesn't cost them any money. They send an email out to a department, example, the Department of Transport. They're getting lots of their people out to talk about transport and engineering, as a year of engineering. It's dead simple, it doesn't cost them any money. Ping an email out, and then the schools go on and they find all the volunteers. So you make it as simple as possible to do something that's profoundly life-changing.
Thank you. I've got some more questions to you, Nick, but thank you. The questions from the floor, we've got some very interesting questions. I think maybe the first one, Joanne, for you, and this is a hard one, so apologies. because it's
Bring
interesting.
it on.
How would technology, AI, machine learning change the gender bias, and would it potentially discriminate even further?
Oh, yeah, that's actually a really good question, because there's a lot of research already been done just on the algorithms that we already have. So AI is sort of the next step. Artificial intelligence is the next step in where we're going. But if you look even at the algorithms, the coding that we currently have, there have been found to be inherent biases. Now, coding is essentially a language, like any other language. The majority of people who are doing coding are men. And so there have been experiments that have already been done on this that have shown a bias in coding, which you would think, again, like with math, you would think it's black and white. There was also a really, really interesting study done of a company that was an open source coding company. And what the experiment entailed was, so open source coding basically means that anyone could contribute code, and if it's good code, it would be accepted, and if it's subpar code, it would be rejected. So again, it should be extremely objective. Is it good or bad code? And they did an experiment to see, gender-wise, male versus female, whose code is accepted. When it was anonymous, women's code was accepted more frequently than men's code. When they put names on it, men's code was accepted more frequently. Women's code was rejected more frequently. So again, it depends on who is building the AI. It depends on the biases that they're bringing into it. And again, that's why, the purpose of That's What She Said in my book is I actually went out and spent, I spoke to hundreds of people, and I really sought out men who are trying to close the gender gap in a variety of industries, because that really is going to be the answer. We're never going to get to the bottom of this unless we have that hyper awareness of what the issues are, and then just take actions ourselves in order to try and counteract what are these unconscious biases.
Thank you. No, that was good. I learned quite a lot out of that one answer as well. Actually, I didn't know that. I suspected it maybe, but I didn't know. Katarina, just a question for you. We've touched on this a little bit, but I think it's such an important question. I just want to use the one here to look at it again. What is the responsibility of business in fighting gender stereotypes at an early age? How responsible should business feel?
I think business should feel very responsible. And again, we're in Davos, and a few days ago, Politico wrote, the debate in Davos this year is blah, blah, Trump, blah, blah, blockchain, walking down there, blah, blah, Trump, blah, blah, blockchain. And I would add to that, it's blah, blah, gender equality. As I said, there are more than 50 events and probably more here about gender equality. So the intention is there's a lot of talk about it, but, coming back to this report, the critical thing is we need to act. We need to do something about it. Otherwise, we will continue having this in the spotlight forever, and nothing will change. And that's where business leaders have such a big responsibility. I think Macron said yesterday, the most important thing that we can do is invest in girls' education. Now, as I said earlier, actually, we are investing in education, but then we're not doing anything about it at a later stage to kind of leverage and capitalize on that education. And business leaders need to A, make it very clear that this is a priority, and B, put in place the programs, the systems, the policies that drive real change within the organizations.
Thank you, I agree. The next question, actually, I'm going to put to you first of all, Katarina, and then to Joanne, and I'm going to answer it as well. Because I think this is an interesting one, and there is no one answer. What tools could be developed to ameliorate the gender balance and diversity quotients in corporate environments? Could tools help shift the balance, software collaboration tools, messaging, and so on? And I think from my point of view, the biggest tool is measurement. I think having information about gender gaps, having information about who's going for promotions, having information about who's doing what training, and casting a light on that, and then asking questions about why there are gaps there and what can be done to improve the gaps, to me is the simplest thing. Lots of people don't do it still. So I think measurement for me, KPIs, some companies publish those KPIs, but at least I believe they should be published internally, because what you measure is what you get. And I really do think that's... and some people don't like the measurement because it's uncomfortable. But I think as a tool to effect change, I think to me it's the single most important thing. But Katarina, why don't you give a view and then Joanne?
I think measurement is critical. In terms of steps, I would say, first of all, it was engaging leadership, engaging men, making it a priority, developing strategies to address it, setting clear targets and measuring those, and then perhaps I would add, communicating very clearly those targets internally and externally, and regularly communicating on progress is key as well, both because it gives a sense that the whole organization is behind it and moving forward together, and gradual progress, and even not making progress kind of shows the intention and where the organization is going. So I think I agree, measurement is key, and communicating about it openly and publishing it is key.
Yeah, I would add to that, which I totally agree with all of that, and I would add to that there are steps that we can take within an organization, starting with the hiring process. So I think at this point there's a general agreement that when you're hiring, you should have a diverse slate of candidates. But one of the things I learned in the research for my book was that that's not enough, that what you actually need is a diverse slate of interviewers. And that's something that I actually changed in my own management style at Gannett at USA Today, making sure that it's not just a bunch of white guys doing the interviewing, because then if you have a diverse slate, it's still they still don't get through. And then there's a number of things that any one of us can do in a corporate setting that actually are very, very useful. For example, women are interrupted 3 times more frequently than men are. And there's a very successful television producer who I spoke to who was realizing that in his writer's room, women were not getting their ideas across. And it was because the men kept interrupting them. So he created a rule, no interruptions, a no interruptions rule for men and women, right? If you get to pitch your idea, nobody's allowed to interrupt you. And at the end, as he said, you can tear them apart. It's fine. I don't care. You can make them cry. But you have to listen to them. And as a result, they were able to succeed. The women were able to succeed. And I'll add in one more, that something that any one of us can do. Women, when they are less than a third of a group, tend to not be heard. The research shows that as well. And so probably any woman in this room listening to us knows what it's like to say something in a meeting and you hear crickets, like nobody seems to have noticed, and then a guy repeats it 2 minutes later, and suddenly, like, Bob is a genius. And so there's a strategy, a tactic that some people have adopted, amplification, which is a woman says something, Katarina says something, and then I in the meeting say, oh my God, Katarina, that was a wonderful idea. I repeat her idea. It both puts it out into the meeting and gives her credit for her idea, so that credit doesn't go elsewhere. But it also keeps her idea alive. And so there's a variety of strategies like this. You don't need to be the boss. Any one of us can do it, and I think they've been proven to be very successful.
And I think, just if I can add to your point about measurement, is accountability. So, I was talking about leadership and how key it is to have, for example, the male CEO saying this is a priority for the company. But unless you then, that CEO asks all their business unit leaders to implement that strategy and holds them accountable for it's no longer acceptable to have 15 men running the various divisions in your unit. These are the targets and this is what you need to progress towards, and we will be measuring it and we will hold you accountable. There may be very little incentive for the other leads in the company to actually drive change. In fact, there may be disincentives if you think about power structures and culture and all the other reasons driving.
That's a good point. Good point. I've got just a few minutes left, and I'd like to come for some wrap-up questions. But Nick, just before I get to that, maybe one last general question for you about the research and what it found around the world. Were there results from countries that surprised you? Were the fact that actually there were the differences around the world other than Iceland? Did that surprise you just as you were going into it before you've seen the results?
Yeah, I think we did some particular work in some of the developing countries. Uganda stands out. And the children there actually had higher aspirations in some ways from more professional jobs than in some developed countries, because they were so influenced by what they see on the TV. So in Uganda, they want to be doctors, they want to be engineers, they want to be scientists. Now that will probably be counterintuitive. And we found that in a number of the developing countries we looked at, there's a real issue. Again, it's who they see and what they aspire to. So, in the UK, sports person, very high up there. And social media and gaming, which is great, if you can then translate to the fact we can't find people who do coding. So if you can get kids interested in that, then you say, well, you're interested in social media, have you thought about a career in coding? And you've got to see the connection between one and the other.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to give each of you the silver bullet to say, if you had one silver bullet, what would you ask the CEOs here at Davos to do to improve gender balance in their own companies and to improve their prospects of influencing the supply of people coming into their organisations with the right aspirations and ambitions? Who would like to start on that? One thing.
I'll start.
Yeah.
Sure. Get more men involved. I mean,
Right.
it's very simple. There's a lot of women's resource groups and etc. But you need to bring them in, and needs to start with leadership. It's not enough to outsource it to your HR department. That's got to start at the very top with the CEO.
Good.
Less talk and more action.
Yeah.
So, the road to Davos is paved with good intentions. The time is to really act now and make those hard changes that I think we kind of know what they are. And this is one simple thing that all CEOs can do. Go out and talk to schools in primary school, get your employees to go out and talk to kids in primary school, and all of us to talk to our children in a different way about their opportunities and about equality.
Nick.
I want people to look at the issue. I want them to go and look at the Drawing the Future video. It's on the World Economic Forum agenda. It's on their Facebook. It's having a lot of shares around the world at the moment. I just want people to go and look at what it says and think, what should we be doing about this? We have an issue. It starts in primary school. We need to do something about it. Have a look at the video. Only 2 minutes. And then go back to your company and say, we need to do something about this. And something simple, get staff to go into schools. Simple as that.
And my last general question for Joanne and Katarina, just from your meetings in Davos around this agenda and other agendas, anything stand out for you this year? Anything that's really special on gender, but other subjects as well, just to give a bit of a feel for the people online, what's going on here this year? Either of you.
I think what's wonderful about Davos this year actually is that there is a renewed sense of optimism. Last year I almost thought that, was the demise of Davos man. They were all sort of, oh dear. Well, this year, perhaps it's because Davos woman is back. I don't know. But it feels like there is some sense of renewed optimism about the value of dialogue and driving change. And, hey, everyone's bemoaning the fact that President Trump is about to arrive. But I think that's great, It's great that he's going to take part in the dialogue. And so I think there's a sense of optimism, and hopefully that will translate into action.
That's interesting, because I feel a sense of fear. So I guess we're going to different, talking to different people. But the fear, less about the politics of it and more about the future. I think every single industry here is facing transformation, digital transformation, and not exactly sure where it's taking them. And the meetings that I've been in, it's, people know they need to transform. They know these are leaders. They know that their employees need to transform. And I think in one of the meetings as I was in yesterday, and I've seen this in my own company, the people know, the employees know they need to transform, but they don't know what they're transforming to. And they're saying, what does that golden city on the hill look like? And I think the leaders here are struggling to say, we've got to figure out how to articulate that. And then on the gender piece of it, what I would say is, I think you mentioned early on that 21% of the participants here are female, and that is a record high. We need to fix that.
Good. As you can see, the debate carries on, and will do throughout the rest of Davos week. But I'll now bring things to a close. But can I do some thank yous? Thank you to all of you in the room for coming and your questions. Really appreciated. Thank you to those listening online, and I hope you enjoy this. And there are many, many web links that have been referenced today. And if all else fails, use old technology and send Nick Chambers an email. And Joanne, Katarina, thank you so much for giving your perspectives today. And Nick, thank you for all the great work in the report that you and your team actually, because I think this is such an important issue. And as you said, the whole area of primary schools is relatively under-researched. I think there is a good body of evidence here that says, you know, we've all, employers, governments and others together, got to get into primary schools to talk about things, to influence outcomes and make sure the right choices are made. So I think this is a great call to action. Thank you all very much. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.